Hello, my name is Zach Lindemeyer, and this is my Project 2 presentation on the psychology of judgment for decision makers. I chose the topic of psychology of judgment for decision makers because I believe it is important to understand how our minds work and process information. I've always thought it was fascinating how we are able to come to conclusions and decisions. However, I wanted to understand how. I believe that by having a better understanding of how our minds process information, I will be able to increase my ability to make smart, informed decisions in the future. The first paper that I read and wrote a summary on was called Cognitive Processes, Models, and Metaphors in Decision Research. It was written by B.R. Newell and A. Broder and was published in 2008. The purpose of their paper was to compare some of the different metaphors and models that are being used for the study of judgment and decision making, and how individuals make decisions when they have several pieces of information presented to them. They start by explaining that in a traditional study of judgment and decision making, a decision or judgment that was made by a decision maker would be compared to a standard or benchmark answer. Depending on how the judgment or decision making aligns with the standard would then ultimately decide whether you could classify it as a good or bad decision. These benchmarks and standards are defined by normative models. They typically have rules like the expected utility theory and probability theory. If a decision maker makes a choice that cannot be predicted or represented by a normative model, the result is considered to be bias. The study of judgment and decision making has been dominated by normative models. However, there are still lots of models out there that have been developed and will continue to be developed. Newell and Broder explained that when attempting to build a model to further that understanding of multi-attribute judgment, there are several key aspects about the cognitive system that should be considered. Capacity limitation, understanding the difference between automatic and controlled processing, individuals' ability to learn, the translation from cause-effect learning into development of categorization, and the regulation of cognition. There are several different models and metaphors that are discussed that can be used to try and further understand each different aspect in this paper. The paper then goes on to explain that since humans have a limited cognitive capacity, there is only so much that we can process at a given time. Some approaches in making models take both intellectual capabilities of an individual as well as look at the environment around the task. Other approaches try to abstain from using normative standards that are from mathematical and economic models. Here I'm going to discuss some of the similarities between the paper, our class ME 541, and my life. The description of normative models and utility theory follow very closely to what we had discussed in class. One topic that I found especially similar was how humans are perceived as information processors. The message portrayed in Module 11 almost perfectly aligns with that of the paper, which leads me to believe that a lot of content covered in this class is associated with the paper and/or the paper or studies in the class are referenced by this paper. Going through the paper, I found several things that I felt I could relate to in my personal life. One very simple example is when the paper talks about humans having a capacity limit and not being able to process, and only being able to process a limited amount of information at a time. In a recent situation for myself, I got accepted into a study abroad program and was immediately given a large amount of information that made me feel very overwhelmed and kind of lost track of everything. So this led to me utilizing what the paper described as simplifying heuristics to make decisions without being fully informed. In regards to housing specifically, I was struggling to find a place to stay. I ended up finding a place that was very close to the school that I was going to be studying at. I used the simplifying heuristic by making a not completely informed assumption that since the apartment was so close to the university and it was a little bit more expensive, it was most likely a place where other students were living that was popular, and so I did not spend much time dwelling on it. Another section I felt I was able to relate to was the automatic versus controlled processing section, specifically automatic processing. I could relate this to one of my hobbies, slalom water skiing. The objective in slalom water skiing is to go in an S-shaped pattern around 6 buoys and then out an exit gate being pulled behind a boat that goes 36 miles an hour. There are a lot of variables in this sport, and so a lot of decisions need to be made very quickly when attempting to run it. The decision that has to be made that I related to this process that was when to make a turn at a buoy. So the goal is to get around the buoy as quickly as possible to enable yourself to set up for the next buoy. If you are running what is called late, without even trying, I find that my mind tries to optimize how much pressure I should apply to my front foot, and as well as how far I should reach with my arm from the handle based off of similar experiences that I've been in the past, and that they try to optimize the situation. This also somewhat leads into how I can relate to the section on learning. The more I attempt going around the buoys late, the better I will get, because I can see the cause and effect of what I tried. This then leads into how I can relate to the categorization section as well, because my mind automatically can sort out what worked and what did not work. Microprocess models of decision making was the second paper that I read. The paper started by really explaining the evolution of the expected utility theory. The second section goes into the different paradoxes in decision making that are created to test the expected utility theory, and also displays the theory's weak points. There are 4 paradoxes or situations that are discussed: the Elias paradox, stochastic dominance, preference reversals, and context-dependent preferences. The paper spends a lot of time focusing on the decision field theory. The paper explains the theory by going through the thought process of the decision maker as they work themselves through a problem. It starts with multiple risky options in this instance. The decision maker then goes through a weighing period and then makes his decision based on the option that would pass the required threshold first. The threshold is very important and varies depending on the decision maker. Impulsive decision makers tend to have a lower threshold and therefore will be able to make faster decisions, whereas somebody who is a more conservative decision maker is going to have a higher threshold and is going to take longer to make a decision. This section then goes on to explain the different parts of the theory, including attention switching mechanism and response mechanisms that occur during decision-making processes. I felt like the first section of the paper, where it explained the timeline of the utility theory, aligned very similarly to the progression of the beginning of the class. Some of the criticisms that were mentioned in the text I also remember learning about. One thing that I thought was intriguing was how all the new methods added onto the expected utility theory. I had wondered going through the course how there were so many extremely similar methods, each one that was just a little less prone to being discredited. Although I know the shortcomings of these normative models were explained in class, but when reading this paper, it really kind of emphasized those points and cleared up a lot of questions that I had prior. So one thing in this paper that did not entirely align with my understanding from the course was something regarding the decision field theory. In class, my understanding was that the decision field theory was a long process, but the paper made it appear that it was heavily dependent on the decision maker themselves. Therefore, like the threshold, which was mentioned before, and as I guess I could see how it is still a long process. Just because of all the steps it has to go. But as far as timing, I thought there was a little bit of difference there. So a time that I related to this paper was when I was reading the section about decision field theory. Another situation came into mind. It was back in 2016 when my dad and I were shopping for my first car, and it had come down to 2 alternatives, a Jeep and a Dodge Ram pickup truck. The Jeep was actually the front runner of the two, and it probably would have been selected if it hadn't been for the Dodge safety features that pushed my dad to pass his threshold to go ahead and purchase a vehicle. However, some information came up later that brought us to the realization that Dodge trucks do have issues with their transmission and rusting in the long run, and these factors may have affected or may have led us to a different decision. However, the safety of the Dodge truck pushed my dad past his threshold and made him to allow him to make the purchase. The third paper that I read was called Heuristics in Politics and Political Elites' Judgment and Decision Making. This paper starts off by identifying how different traditions identify heuristics. The two traditions that are primarily noted are H&B and F&F. Both of these traditions are built off of the founding fathers of heuristics, Herbert Simon, who defined them as methods for arriving at satisfactory solutions with modest amounts of computation. H&B and F&F have differing views of the topic. H&B look at the utilization of heuristics not necessarily as a bad thing, but as a way to make decisions that may not be as good as using normative standards such as the utility theory. F&F focuses on how heuristics consistently allow individuals to make decisions that are good enough for whatever situation they are in. Another different viewpoint in the tradition is how heuristics are utilized. H&B believes that heuristics are used subconsciously and without the decision maker noticing. F&F believes that heuristics occur knowingly to the decision maker. Heuristics are very apparent in politics. In the second section of this paper, the writer dives into whether or not politicians utilize heuristics, specifically the availability and representativeness heuristics. The final section of the paper, it discusses what needs to be done in the future to further understand the utilization of heuristics in politics. One similarity that I was able to find between the paper and class was in regards to simplifying heuristics discussed in Module 11 in the class, availability and representativeness. So I have personally had several experiences using both of these heuristics in my life. One time that I used the availability heuristic was when I was planning for the Purdue Water Ski Club to go to nationals. When going to the national competition, it is incredibly crucial to begin planning as early as possible due to the large amounts of people going. The way it works is that the top 6 teams from the Midwest region would go to nationals, and those 6 teams are determined at a regional event. However, Purdue as a team was ranked 9th. Instead of outright qualifying, we were entered into a wild card. I knew that in the past several years, the Midwest usually claimed all 3 wild card slots for the nationals competition. So knowing this, I went ahead and I didn't do any calculations, but I just went ahead and started making plans for travel, housing, and food. Unfortunately, the water ski team did make it, but we did not incur any other costs. The other instance in which I remember using the representativeness heuristic was when I assumed someone's skills level based on the team that they were on. In collegiate water skiing, just like any other sport, there are teams that naturally just dominate other teams. And a lot of southern schools are scholarship schools. And so when you ski with them, you just normally assume that all of the skiers on their team are very good or professionals. So this project has been very interesting and educational for me. Through reading each of these papers, I constantly found myself thinking of situations where I had to make decisions that were similar to the ones I was reading about. One thing that was very apparent throughout the different paper, although that there are several theories and models out there to describe the decision-making process, there is still so much to learn. I never knew just how complex and amazing the human mind is. Something that I will definitely take with me moving forward is being cognizant of when I am using heuristics. Obviously, they are very necessary and important but a lot of times those shortcuts can end up leading to undesirable outcomes. Completing this project, I also believe, will help us students to make more rational decisions and be selective when utilizing heuristics. This will help all of us greatly as we move forward into jobs, future classes, and regular day-to-day life.